people.
But your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on.
Well, that's true.
But
they weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. Right. These were people. This was an actual, it happened a few days ago. And
they're hundreds of miles away, though. They're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President, if I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian investigation because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a very rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat people that way. Go ahead. Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
In Jim's defense, I've traveled with him and watched him. He's a diligent reporter who busts.
Well, I'm not a big fan of yours either. So
I understand.
To be honest.
So let me ask you a question, if I can. You repeatedly said
you aren't the best,
Mr. President. You repeatedly over the course.
Okay, just sit down, please. Well, when you report fake news, when you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Mr. President, over the course. All
right, guys, so we got to talk about the Associated Press, which has now been banned from the White House due to the fact that they refuse to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And according to the White House, it's actually more than that. It's the fact that the AP has a partisan-style playbook in which they weaponize language in ways that are not journalistic, right? Like, for example, the AP, in their little style playbook, they have explained why they lowercase white, okay? They will not uppercase white when referring to white people, but they will capitalize black. And the AP says that they will continue to lowercase the term white in racial, ethnic, and cultural senses. This decision follows our move last month to capitalize black in such cases. We consulted with a wide group of people internally and externally around the globe and considered a variety of commentary in making these decisions. Yeah, so the AP is woke, okay? And they are liberal propaganda, obviously, which, makes it surprising that they just continue to dead name the Gulf of America, okay? And the Gulf of Mexico is the dead name for the Gulf of America, okay? All you got to do is just consider the Gulf to be trans, right? It's trans, right? It's now... We've changed it to the Gulf of America, and anybody continuing to call it the Gulf of Mexico, that's hate and bigotry, right? That's really harmful stuff. Okay, I don't understand why the AP is continuing to use the dead name for the Gulf of America. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But the White House is essentially accusing the AP of spreading misinformation by continuing to call it the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, the liberal media, they are upset about this, and the Democrats are upset about this as well too.
I have a for you. Which White House official made the decision to bar the AP reporter from the Oval Office and the diplomatic reception room last night?
Well, first of all, let me just set the record straight. It is a privilege to cover this White House. It's a privilege to be the White House press secretary. And nobody has the right to go into the Oval Office and ask the President of the United States questions. That's an invitation that is given. And there are hundreds of outlets on this campus, many of you in this room who don't have the privilege of being part of that pool every single day and getting to ask the President questions. We reserve the right to decide who gets to go into the Oval Office, and you all have credentials to be here, including the Associated Press, who is in this briefing room today.
But isn't it retaliatory in nature is the argument, because the reason that the AP was barred, which they said was because they're not using the phrase Gulf of America, they're using Gulf of Mexico in line with their standards. And so the question here is this setting a precedent that this White House will retaliate against reporters who don't use the language that you guys believe reporters should use? And how does that align with the First Amendment commitment that you were just talking about?
I was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable. And it is a fact that the body of water off the coast of Louisiana is called the Gulf of America. And I'm not sure why news outlets don't want to call it that, but that is what it is. The Secretary of Interior has made that the official designation in the geographical identification name server. And Apple has recognized that. Google has recognized that. Pretty much every other outlet in this room has recognized that body of water as the Gulf of America. And it's very important to this administration that we get that right, not just for people here at home, but also for the rest of the world. Sure.
And the Associated Press, a 179-year-old newspaper organization from the White House, because it declines to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. This is straight-up press censorship based on retaliatory viewpoint discrimination. Trump's DOD kicked out 8 news groups that had space in the Pentagon, but which asked skeptical questions of the new secretary, including the New York Times, NBC News, and the Washington Post, all ousted in favor of outlets willing to faithfully advance the party line of the state, like Breitbart and One American News Network.
Yeah, so it's not just the Democrats and the mainstream liberal media that are upset about this name change, which, by the way, really blows my mind, because these are the same individuals that say that you are a bigot, you're a hateful person if you do not bow down and capitulate to individuals who don't like the genitalia and say that, hey, you have to refer to me as the opposite sex or gender, right? Or as some other gender, okay? Yeah, if you don't capitulate to their language, which is a very hard language to learn, by the way, you are a bigot, right? You're hateful. However, they can choose not to capitulate to the language of the President of the United States, who says that, hey, the Gulf of Mexico is now the Gulf of America, which in my opinion is more inclusive, right? It's more inclusive of everybody in that region, okay? That Gulf is shared by the United States and Mexico and Cuba, right? So I think it's right that we just call it the Gulf of America, right? I mean, all of those places encompass America, right? It wasn't the Gulf of the United States of America. It's just the Gulf of America. That is inclusive. For whatever reason, they don't like inclusivity now, right? They don't like that now. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But the president of Mexico, the Chihuahua president, Ms. Claudia Sheinbaum, who I think is an example of how machismo has failed in Mexico, she is upset about this to the point where she is basically threatening to take legal action against Google for going along with President Trump's name change. Take a look.
Para poder cambiar un nombre de un mar internacional, pues no es un país quien lo cambia, es una organización internacional. Entonces, estamos enviando esta carta a Google, la vamos a enviar hoy. Por cierto, también le vamos a pedir que América Mexicana aparezca. Que cuando uno ponga América Mexicana, aparezca el mapa.
Yeah, so the Mexican president is so triggered that she is moving to sue Google over this name change. And what makes this even more hilarious is that the name appears differently depending on where you are. Like, for example, if you are in the United States of America, it appears as the Gulf of America, which is the correct name, right? and if you are in Mexico, then it appears as the Gulf of Mexico. But if you're outside of Mexico and the United States, it appears as the Gulf of Mexico, but it has Gulf of America in parentheses, right? That's the hilarious part about it. I think that's what really triggers her the most. So with that being said, we got to talk about another Trump deranged individual, washed up former CNN anchor Jim Acosta, who no longer has his job at CNN due to the fact that his extreme Trump derangement results in him being demoted to the midnight shift. Okay, he didn't like that. I don't know why, because nobody ever watches CNN, right? It doesn't matter what time of the day that you're on television, nobody's watching it. So I'm not sure what's the difference between the midnight shift and the 10 a.m. shift for anybody working at CNN. But he didn't like it, okay? So he decided to quit. And now he is a full-time podcaster, right, that nobody listens to. But, you know, he feels as if he has enough clout in the industry to call for, again, a full-blown boycott of the Trump administration, the White House, by the liberal media, by reporters over the AP blacklist. Take a look.
The other thing that I have to mention before I let everybody go, another episode from the Dear Leader Files. The president of the United States should not be in the business of punishing news organizations for refusing to be red pilled. Let me tell you what I'm talking about here. The Associated Press reporting the White House blocked one of the AP's journalists from an event in the Oval Office on Tuesday after demanding that the news organization alter its style on the Gulf of Mexico, which Trump has ordered to be renamed the Gulf of America. Basically, they kicked out a reporter from the AP out of the Oval Office, wouldn't let them into an event because they refused, because the AP is going to continue to call the Gulf of Mexico by its name, the Gulf of Mexico. It is not the Gulf of America. It's only the Gulf of America if you surrender yourself to Trump's warped imagination that he can just go around and look at things on a map and rename them in his honor or in the honor of what he sees fit. It's goofy, it's nutty, and to me, it's kind of like the National Geographic being kidnapped by the My Pillow guy. We're not going to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. We're just not going to do it. And I think my hat's off to anybody in the press. And here's Duke now. Duke's coming in. He's not going to call it the Gulf of America. We love America. We love America. I got George Washington over here. I got the Statue of Liberty over here. I got Greg the Plant right there. We love America. That's not in dispute here. The dispute is over whether we're going to just surrender ourselves to the warped imagination of the man in the Oval Office. We are just not going to do that. We're not going to call Washington, D.C. the Emerald City. This is wicked stuff, y'all. Wicked stuff.
Yeah, wicked stuff, according to Jim Acosta. He went on to say, quote, "It is crucial for news outlets to unite in opposition to any attempts by the administration to harm individual journalists and their organizations," Acosta wrote on his Substack, The Jim Acosta Show, Sunday. I'm pretty sure Jim Acosta knows firsthand because he dealt with getting punished by the Trump administration for his unprofessional outburst during the press conferences. Quote, "News organizations in Washington should be banding together to send the message that members of the press will determine how they cover the news," Acosta continued. Quote, "Not the White House, not the man behind the resolute desk. No matter how he redraws the world's maps, the presidential Sharpie is not mightier than the pen." Yeah. So basically, he is calling for his fellow colleagues to boycott the White House, which honestly I think is a great idea, right? Now, why did I say that's a great idea? Well, the reason why is because that means all the propaganda outlets won't be there anymore, right? And it will be new opportunities for other outlets, right? Up and coming outlets that want to get their feet wet when it comes to covering the news to go in and to take their place. So if that's what they want to do, fine, right? If that's what they want to, if they want to stop being Trump deranged and they just don't want to cover what's happening in the country, cool, right? I mean, at this point, who knows? Who knows? Maybe it might work out in their favor because the Trump derangement hasn't been working, right? The boohoo whine and crying about Trump 24/7 hasn't been working. So maybe them not covering Trump, that might actually help them out, right? It might actually help their credibility. Maybe they'll start to cover some of these other issues in this country, local issues in this country that really don't get too much coverage because it makes Democrats at the local level look bad, right? Like, for example, crime and stuff like that. Right? Maybe they'll start to cover those types of stories, right? Real stories instead of, being Trump deranged 24/7. I don't know. I'm just saying that maybe you should be careful what you ask for, Jim Acosta. I don't think that this media boycott is going to work out the way that you think, right? I really don't. But who knows? If that's the way they want to do, it is what it is. Now, with that being said, JD Vance has chimed in on this because, again, you have the leftists like Mehdi Hasan, boohoo whining and crying about the AP being banned. And Mehdi Hasan tried to basically call out JD Vance for hypocrisy. He says, "Hey, JD, I know you're busy lecturing the Europeans on free speech, but have you seen this?" JD Vance says, "Yes, dummy. I think there's a difference between not giving a reporter a seat in the White House press briefing room and jailing people for dissenting views. The latter is a threat to free speech. The former is not. I hope that helps." Yeah. So you know what's hilarious about this? Is the fact that these are the same exact individuals that were totally fine with the federal government trying to censor speech by pressuring social media platforms to censor opinions that they didn't like, okay? And the leftists defended this, right? They said, well, technically, the government's not throwing you in jail, so therefore, they're not really banning your speech, right? You're not being thrown in jail. You're not being punished for it. So it's okay. They also use this argument to justify when the social media platforms do it independently of the government. They say, well, you're not banned from speaking. You just can't speak on that platform, right? And I mean, hey, can you argue that the same thing is not happening here, where you have the White House saying, well, the AP, they can write whatever they want to write. But you know, this journalist is just not allowed into the press room, right? I mean, ultimately, it is a privilege. There are certain outlets that are allowed and certain outlets that are not allowed. Okay, every outlet is not going to be allowed into the press room, right? All of the so-called right-wing outlets that now are allowed into the press room, they weren't allowed under the Biden administration. Was that censorship, right? Was that censorship? Was that an attack on free speech? Of course not. Because they were free to write whatever they wanted to write, okay? And that's the exact same thing happening right now with the AP. Their speech is not banned. They can write whatever they want, right? They want to keep calling it the Gulf of, Mexico or whatever, they can. They want to keep dead naming the Gulf of America, fine, do that. But, hey, we don't have to platform views that are, hateful and bigoted, right? Which, I mean, when you don't use language that the left feels like you should use, that's what they call it, right? They call it hate and bigotry. And the White House doesn't have to platform this type of hate and bigotry, right? A lot of people are being harmed by the AP refusing to use the name Gulf of America. When you continue to dead name the Gulf of America, that's harmful, right? So, hey, it is what it is. I mean, this is the game that the left wanted to play. And all of a sudden, they don't like when they get a taste of their own medicine. It's just funny how that works. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.